Everyone. On behalf of the Center for Migration, Gender, and Justice, we are delighted to feature this event as part of this year's Global Gender and Migration Forum, a shared global commons connecting knowledge, policy, and practice across migration and gender. As a multi-stakeholder mechanism, the forum facilitates collaboration across sectors and geographies, centering migrants' lived experiences and perspectives. Today's event on climate, mobility, and inequality plays a central role in this, and we are excited to learn from our colleagues today. We hope you will join us for tomorrow's upcoming featured event on narratives, media, and gender migration showcase, which will be tomorrow on May 8th. I'm happy to provide further information on what we have planned. And with this, I will pass it over to our colleagues. Take it away. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. It's a real privilege to be part of this space. Thank you so much, Center for Migration, Gender, and Justice, for allowing us to bring this really important topic to light. My name is Raquel Prado. I'm the founder and executive director of MigraClima. And today I will present the agenda. Next slide, please. So we're going to start with welcome and sessioning opening. I'm going to introduce a little bit about MigraClima work and how we were created. And then I'm going to go over the session structure, and I will show you the share board for insights and recommendation, because the whole idea of this presentation is that everyone contribute and engage in different ways. And then we're going to go over Magdalena's presentation showing life stories of Venezuelan migrant women in South Brazil, and then Abdul's presentations, who moves and who stays, and then Isabella's presentation, the best migration policies, local resilience, and we're going to close with Q&A. Next slide, please. So MigraClima started from a thought that sounds simple, but often is overlooked in policy rooms. So climate change does not affect people equally, and neither does migration, right? So the whole idea of MigraClima is to be a research and advocacy platform dedicated to advancing climate mobility through a global South and gender lens. So our work sits at the intersection of research, storytelling, and policy advocacy. And we aim to transform knowledge into action. But not only by producing evidence, like articles, research papers, but also by amplifying the lived experience of people navigating displacement in real time, especially in the global South. So those are some of our values and our mission that you can find in our website. And I'm not going through each one of them, but just an idea. Next slide, please. And one of the main things we are trying to do with MigraClima is to build a database of all climate mobility articles, research, everything that you can find about climate mobility. We want to facilitate to make sure people have access about this topic, because a lot of people don't talk about it, and we are already living that. So it's not going to be a future thing. It's already present in our time. So that's why it's so important, and I invite all of you to know a little bit about our work in our social media and through our website. And you can also submit your work if you have anything you would like to submit. Not only articles, but visual work too, infographics, short videos, storytelling, anything is welcome. Next slide, please. So today's sessions moves across 3 layers, and I will want to take a moment to name them before we begin. First, we're going to ground ourselves in lived realities through Magdalena's presentation. We're going to hear stories of how climate displacement is actually experienced on the ground, and particularly by women and communities that rarely appear in global data. Second, we're going to zoom to examine the structural dynamics. We will ask who is able to move, who is forced to stay and why, and what role power, gender, and inequality play in those outcomes. And finally, we're going to shift towards solutions. We will explore how resilience, when designed inclusively and from the local level up, can become one of the most powerful tools to prevent forced displacement in the first place. Next slide, please. And throughout this session, we invite you to engage actively, not just as listeners. We just don't want to just talk and you just listen to us. We want your participation at every moment. So we want you to contribute through this share board we are sharing here. You can get your phone and scan the QR code, or you can access through this website. We're gonna also share the link soon in the chat. And we really want you to be engaged in these sessions, because at the end, we're gonna use this insights, challenges, and recommendations to create like a shared outcome document to understand how our presentation here bring up light into all the problems we are sharing here today. So please share your recommendations, your insights, your challenge in this website. I can show how the website works really quick, if that's helpful. I'm going to share my screen really quick. So here's the website. Can everyone see my screen? Okay. So basically, we're going to write a key consideration of any presentation. You can do this during the presentation or after. And then you're going to put your name. So one key consideration, I'm not going to do it, so just because it's going to show on the board. And then you put your name if you want to be identified for formal recognition, right? And then you're going to click on submit, but then it's not going to show to the next one. So you have to hit next question instead of submit, okay? So that's how it works, basically. So yeah, next, thank you so much. So our first speaker is Magdalena Coelho, Brazilian postdoctoral researcher in organizational studies with a PhD earned in Brazil. She holds an international master's degree with academic training in Sweden and Italy. Magdalena's current research focuses on gender and social justice, with a current emphasis on migration. Thank you, Magdalena, for your presence. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Raquel, and everyone that is participating. It's a pleasure. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, I've been carrying out gender research on gender equality for longer than 10 years. And more recently, I have been dedicating to migration, still with the gender perspective. And next, please. And then I am starting now, just starting this postdoctoral research. And then why? How did I start it and why? First, 2 years ago, we had historical floods here in my region that affected a lot of people and affected me as well somehow. Of course, my house was not under the water, but there was a lot of other effects. And it changed my career desires. I was in a transition period, and then I decided to work for in the third sector for NGOs, because I saw how the NGOs worked in the emergency, and I really wanted to make a difference. And then there were these two events that started the NGO that we co-founded, and I found a partner to co-found an NGO, a group of people that work for women and children in vulnerability. So we managed to, in the first year of foundation, to implement our first social project. And it was in an area of irregular occupation, so a private land that was occupied, that was in extreme socioeconomic vulnerability. So next, please. So the first event, for you to have an idea of how extensive it was, the region where I live, Brazil, is huge, but much bigger than it shows in our world map, right? If you put the right proportions. And I live in the extreme south, and this region is the size of Italy. And so the floods affected 95% of the region. If you think about it, then almost whole Italy. Which makes it harder for a response. So here the number of people affected, and it is caused, we are talking about climate then, it is caused also mainly, one of the aspects, the reasons, is because of the deforestation in the region of Amazonia and down, north and center of the country, the agribusiness, and illegal deforestation, and then the droughts that are caused there, they end up causing a lot of rain in the south. there was a situation, many situations during this crisis, right? That we had to make shelters and a lot of other rescue teams, and there was I have narratives. My study's just starting, but there was narratives from people who works for migrant populations saying that there was a competition for aid in the communities between the migrant communities and the local communities. So like, why are they not from here? Why do they get more resources than us and more aid? And there was this competition because migrants here, they are located in economic vulnerable areas. And this, we know, right, climate change usually affects more people that are in vulnerable areas in this vulnerable situation. There is also the aspect of Portuguese. We don't speak Spanish here, we speak Portuguese, and then it's not the language of this more than 159 nationalities that we have here in the south of Brazil. And then 2 years later, we tend to almost forget it happens. But then when we go to the vulnerable areas, we see how it still impacts the lives of people. Next, please. So the NGO project was in this irregular territory, usually in the peripheral areas around the cities and the metropolitan areas, very close to rivers and areas like that. So we worked for women and children. There was a focus there because it was an irregular territory in the housing issue to help them not to be expelled from the territory, like not with police force and in a way like that. So there was some involvement in that, in helping them actually map their community. First, to know how many families are there, because one point that Raquel presented is like, we don't have information about these irregular territories. As they are irregular, the city hall doesn't take the garbage, there is no sanitation or electricity, everything is irregular. So we don't know, even the health unit that is responsible for this area didn't know that the people were there and how many people. So we helped with this diagnosis. That was the main focus. And the first focus was to understand who is living there, how many people, what are the profile, and then also with the perspective of health issues. So we see the housing, for example, the houses. There was a lot of donation for housing items from all over the country, but still the houses their woods are still wet, like and rotten from the water, for being under the water for so long. And some houses didn't, of course, are not there anymore. So one thing that these people, the migrant people, they are invisible. Of course, people in vulnerable situations here are already invisible, but the migrant people more so. Now that I say that I'm doing this research, people say, "Oh, I didn't know there were so many migrants here in Portugal, in our state." Yeah, there are a lot, and people don't even know because they're not in the media. And the floods gave a little bit of visibility, but it was still too little. So in Brazil, for the ones who don't know, there is a universal health coverage in schooling. And they have the rights of having the same benefits that Brazilian vulnerable families have here. Of course, it's a challenge for to teach them and to give them information so that they learn about the rights. So, of course, not only Venezuelans, but here in my state, which is called Rio Grande do Sul, besides the Haitians, I don't know how to say that in English, it was the third state that received the most immigrants in the process of relocating Venezuelans to Brazil in general. And also now, because of the humanitarian crisis in Cuba, lots of Cubans are arriving as well. So the next, please. So this population, they come here mainly because of course, the size of the country, and because we have a program that other countries from the north, especially, were here studying our program. It's called Intersectional Action. So it's a humanitarian response that offers reception, shelter, food, and send these people to different regions because the frontier in the north can't take everyone. And also for voluntary return if they want. And we tend to imagine that they don't want to come back. They do want to come back. They have children there and they have family. And that's what I want to understand, how the floods cause more mobility. What were the impacts? And now that Venezuela's political scenario changed, I want to understand these new impacts in their situation. So what we observe in this specific community is the lack of social bonding between the community, among them, the community as a whole, but among Venezuelans as well. There are areas where they are more united, they have a leadership, and it's important to say these community leaders are mostly women. Usually it's like that, mostly. But still there are communities where they don't organize as a group. So next, please. In the question, why women, why my research will focus on women. So here we have information from OIM, I don't know how to say it in English, right? The organization, International Organization for Migration, with some aspects that show that half migrants are women and girls migrating alone or as heads of household. I have many examples to give, which I don't think we will have the time, right? But moms come with one baby, the other baby stays, and it's very hard because they're completely alone, and they have greater risks, including sexual exploitation, trafficking, violence. Violence against women, it's a reality in Brazil, it's worldwide, but here as well. It's rising, it's increasing. So families in hardship in coping mechanisms, as coping mechanisms, sometimes like they marry their kids, for example. So there's double discrimination because they are women and migrants. So also racial discrimination. So the reproductive issue, women don't stop getting pregnant when they are on the move. And even though they have the right here to do the whole follow-up of their pregnancy, people sometimes don't know. Migrant women and girls are more likely to face health problems. So this is from OIM, but then I have been working with CIBAI, which is a Center for Integration of Migrants here. They have longer than 100 years of work. They are a religious center, and they also told me that it's much more difficult for women to be employed and to have productive integration. So I've been trying to do voluntary work for them to be able to provide together with companies some training for them to help them get integrated economically. Next, please. So final thoughts here. Initial insights, right? That I tend that my research is gonna help advocacy. So is that NGOs, government, and the private sector have to work together. That's the way we could find. But then it's important to add that it has to be with the communities, right? We have to be present and understand the reality of the territories, because I see a lot of NGOs, big or small, we tend to come with solutions, and that's not the best way. We need to work not for them, but with them. And then, again, it's a feminist issue. Here in Brazil, we have a social program that is called Bolsa Família. It's a family allowance that decides to send the money to the hand of women if the kids are in school. So it's been proven that they invest in the family and the basic needs much more than men, and they have more vulnerability there. So there is this lack of visibility in research, in the media, and the lack of data. There are, of course, some numbers about the numbers of migrants, but we need to go beyond the numbers, right? Numbers are important, but we need also to qualify this information, which is what I'm trying to do. So my research is not quantitative, it's qualitative. And I hope I can also add to this lack of research here in my state about the presence of the people here and how they live, what are the main obstacles, and also their potential, their autonomy, right? So in order to give, to show this reality as a whole and not to victimize people, I decided to use the method of life stories, which are narratives, very close to autobiographies as well, because it allows for the representation of people from the passive to active individuals. And I like to quote this Nigerian author, very famous, that is Chimamanda Adichie. She says, there is the danger of a single story, so I want to listen to women and understand their story. Of course, focused on this event of the floods, but also before that. And I think that's it. I have a family issue now that is taking place. I hope I can stay to the end of the discussions. If I can't, I will be very happy to keep exchanging information through MigraClima, but also you can add me on LinkedIn. It's Magdalena, my name and my last name, Magdalena Coelho. And I'll be happy to keep exchanging ideas because it's a new research. I'm starting, I'm learning, and it's really nice to be able to exchange in this group. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Magdalena, for your presentation. It's actually really meaningful that we are having this discussion 2 years after the floods in Rio Grande do Sul, which devastated almost the whole state, right? As you mentioned, because Rio Grande do Sul is a huge state, the size of Italy, and 90% of the state were underwater, right? That's crazy to think about it.
Thank you, Raquel, for... Yeah, sorry to, but it's a very emotional moment because it's been 2 years exactly, right? This week we have been celebrating, not, but remembering 2 years of the floods. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. It was really interesting, really meaningful as well. We're gonna go to the next presentation, but before that, I just would like to remind people who were not here before that we are doing a joint board, and we are using this board as a share board for recommendations at the end of our presentation. And if you would like to be recognized, please add your name when you're putting your main challenge, your main insight, or your main recommendation. There are 3 types of questions there, and you just hit the next question button once you submit one question. And we're going to share with you at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. So our next speaker is Abdul Ganiyu Alhassan, who is a development researcher with over 7 years of experience in climate change, migration, and security in West Africa. He focuses on climate change effects on pastoralist mobility and livelihoods. Through research and international presentations, Abdul aims to support policies addressing migration and sustainable development. Abdul, thank you so much for being here. The floor is yours.
When climate change affects people and then they decided to adopt mobility as an adaptation strategy, who has the opportunity to move and who stay? What them to stay? And those moving, what are the driving force for their mobility? And this story comes from pastoralists who migrate from site focus on. So what this matters is, we all know that climate change has been a widely issue that has been widely debated among policymakers and academics. When we look at climate-related events such as hurricanes, windstorm, it has a lot of impact on people and their livelihood. So the African continent has been the major receiver of the extreme impact of these changes. And majority of these people who reside in this region, most of their livelihood depends on the natural environment. So if we look at farmers, they depend mostly on the environment for survival because they have to farm either year-round or once a year in order to feed their families and also sell some to buy whatever that they want. If we look at pastoralists, majority of the food that animals eat are grasses, which availability depends on how good the weather is, how available the rain is within that period. So my line of research, we are saying that since these people livelihood depend on the environment and it is affecting them, and climate change has been a major contributor, what are some of the factors, or what are some of the driving forces that is usually motivating them to either stay or move? So if you look at the study context, which happens to be the northern part of Ghana, majority of the people there are living in the rural area, especially the pastoralists who depend on the land and then the water for survival. They often adopt this mobility as a central survival strategy. But in recent times, we have realized that their movements have increased significantly. So the purpose of my case study was to look at 40 years back. So from 1983 up to 2003, how was the movement like? And from 2003 up to 2023, what has changed? So before this period, between 1982 to 2002, movement was very limited within the geographic scope of the area. And when I mean the geographic scope, I took the northern part of Ghana, specifically Bushebo, as a case study. Movement was largely limited within this area, simply because there was enough resources for these people to depend on. And the relationship between the farmers and then the herders within that period was very smooth. It means that there was little conflict among them. And there was also a peaceful, the community, there were also limited payments. So within this period, pastoralists do not need to pay for any amount of money before their animal can access resources. So because of that, they have everything they needed wherever they settle. And as a result, they were not forced to move. And as they were not moving, they were staying with the family. I remember one interview, I was interviewing one person, and then he told me that within that period, women played a key responsibility in ensuring that they take care of the smaller animals. And when I mean the smaller livestock, I mean goat, chicken, sheep. These animals were dedicated to only women, and they were taking care of them, which the family usually depends on. It means that most of the family resources, most of the things that the family were depending on, were being managed by the women in that household. And they were largely, it was appreciative, like they appreciate whatever that the women were doing at that particular moment. But within the period of 2003 up to 2023, these movements have changed. It has changed because most of the resources that were available, pastoralists were no longer getting access to the resources that they want. It means that they have to move. So if you look at the map, you realize that there has been a spread all over the country. So this is the map of Ghana, and there have been a spread, meaning that pastoralists are now moving to wherever that they think they can access resources. And as they are moving, it because of this movement is as a result of expansion of farming, because of the innovations, like people are now using farm tractors. People now see the value of farming. They now farm in larger quantities. So because of that, pastoralists are not able to get enough field to feed their animals. Also, there have been a lot of loss on the grass. So the quantity of grass that were available as at 1982 to 2002 were not the same quantity that the people were receiving from 2003 up to 2023. So that kind of disparity also creates movement for these pastoralists, because they need to move to other places in order to support their animals, which their main livelihood depends on. Also, the water availability also shifts significantly within this period. They cited an example where majority of rivers that used not to get dried during dry season are now being dried even before the set of the rainy season. Meaning that means that the rivers that they were depending on all year round, they can no longer depend on those rivers because those rivers used to receive adequate rainfall, which keeps them throughout the year. But now the patterns of the rains have to reduce significantly. And because of that, they cannot hold water throughout the year. So they have to move to places where they can get access to water in order to support their animals. Another factor was the conflict. There has now been a farmer-herder conflict throughout the region. So if you look at it, there have been a lot of statistics about how farmers and pastoralists are now killing each other in order because of land issues. So most of the pastoralists, in order to avoid this kind of trouble, they choose to move to other places because of that. But in terms of this movement, not all of them has the opportunity to move. And one of the people who do not have those who move usually are the resource people, those who are wealthy, because mobility has now become very expensive. As they indicated in our interviews, that when they moved to other places to access water and grass, they have to pay either in cash or in kind. So those who can afford this kind of payment are the only people who are allowed to move within this period. And those who cannot afford to pay are being forced to stay back, not because they want to, but because they cannot afford the cost that is involved in movement. Another driving factor are those who has the power to make decisions within the household. Pastoralists are people who are very traditional. Within the household of the pastoralist is the household head, usually a man, who make decisions as to who move and who stay back. And apparently, women are not part of those who are allowed to move within this period, with the exception of newly wedded wife. So, like for instance, like if you are a very young, energetic man, and then you just got married, and it is time for you to move because the place that you are staying, you cannot have access to a lot of grass to feed your animals, and it is time for you to move. The household head can decide that because you just got married, you can send your wife along the journey. But those who not apart from these people, not all of them, not all women, that the rest of the women are not allowed to move. And when men moved, responsibility shifted to women. Now they have to take care of the household. It means they have to make provisions for what the house people will eat, for what their children will eat. They have to take care of the health of their children, and they also have limited resources, thereby increasing their vulnerability within the household level. Another important thing is the decision to move. Now, the decision to move also rests on the people who have animals. Now, even with the presence of when everything is evident that climate change is affecting our environment, but you do not own an animal. You know, most of the pastoralists, they take some of the animals on contract basis. Like I can give my animals to one person. Okay, take care of this animal for me. Feed them, raise them, make sure that they are okay, and then I'll be paying you, or we can come to terms on whatever thing that they want. Some people negotiate for land that they can also be used for farming. Now, when this agreement is settled, and then there is a change in the environment, that pastoralist cannot send my animal to any other place without my consent. So those who possess animal also has the power to move, make decisions to move, than those who do not have animals and they have to take care of other people's animals. Now, all these have increased both. Most of these people cannot move because they do not have resources. Some choose to stay because they are emotionally attached to others. Others also others also choose not to move because they have no other alternative. They cannot move at all. And you see, both can increase risk and they can also become more vulnerable. So if we look at gender in terms of gender and inequality aspect of this presentation, now climate mobility is not a gender neutral. And why do we say this? We are saying this because women have less control over mobility decisions. They do not have the power to make decisions to move to wherever that they want to move to, simply because they are still under the care of men. Now, if you look at within the pastoralist community, and not only the pastoral, if you come to look at the northern part of Ghana, decisions are always taken by men. So if you are a woman and then you realize that if I moved, my condition, my living standard will improve, you cannot move. Because unless your father, or if you are married, your husband give you the consent to move before you will be able to move. And another thing is, they carry most of the responsibilities when the men move. Like I indicated in my early presentation, they have to take care of the family, make sure that they provide everything that the family needed. And this show how inequality are interconnected. Now, one of the key findings is that mobility is not always an adaptation strategy. So in the past, we realized that immobility worked very well for the people, simply because there was enough resources for them to graze on, for them to feed their animals, and then there was also a cordial relationship between the farmers and then the herders. And this makes their staying back, their stay put much more easier for them. But in recent times, mobility has now become a survivor. However, it is very risky. Risky in terms of conflict, risky in terms of expenses. So those who have the resources and they can move only have the power to move. Those who do not have resources to move, because if they cannot pay for the expenses that are involved in movement, they are forced to choose back. Those who have animals on their own have the ability to move. Those who do not have animals on their own and are taking care of other people's own do not have the power to move. Women do not have the power to move. It's only because if their husband or their parents do not give them the consent to move, they do not have. And they are the people who bear most of the responsibilities in the household. Now, what needs to change? We are saying that we need to improve access to land and water. When we have this, when we improve this access, it will help reduce the cost of movement, so that either rich or poor people can still move. As we indicated in our presentation, before you move to other place and access water and grass, you have to pay for it. So those who do not have that resources will be forced to stay back. And we also need to address this issue of inequality, in the sense that decisions to move should not really rest on only the men. Women should be given the opportunity to move when they decide to move. They should be given the opportunity to exploit their potentials when they want to, because it is obvious that they play a key role when it comes to managing the affairs of the household that they are staying. And the last is the support for what? We should all support inclusive governance. There are numerous bylaws that are governing how resources are managed within the communities in the northern part of the community. So if you look at the West African bloc, for instance, the transhuman protocol that is being enacted by the ECOWAS, which give pastoralists the opportunity to travel across all ECOWAS member states, access grass and water. Now, there is a disconnect between this policy and what is actually working on the ground. So, on the part of the Equals Protocol, the people are being granted access to water and then the grass when they move to the underground. But in reality, they have to pay before they can have access to this. So, meaning those who come and do not have resources to pay will not benefit from their movement, and they will be exposed to more what? Vulnerable. And by conclusion, I'm saying that from mobility to equity, mobility is shaped by inequality, but adaptation is a must be what? Adaptation must be what? And inclusive. Thank you very much for your time and for listening to me.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Abdul. That was really helpful to understand the main things about mobility versus immobility, and all the gender lens and perspective about it. So our final speaker is Isabella Goulart. Isabella is an attorney and ESG specialist with a background in governance, sustainability management, and regulatory law. At MigraClima, she focuses on research and policy advocacy, applying a strategic ESG framework and gender perspective to climate-induced displacement and the protection of vulnerable populations. Thank you so much, Isabella, for being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Raquel. Hi, everyone. So I'm the last speaker. After me, we're going to open for discussion. Magdalena and Abdul just presented 2 concrete cases, but my presentation is more related to the policies itself. So what I want to present today is what I believe should be the focal point of the Global South discussions on climate mobility. And that is climate adaptation policies designed to prevent forced displacement. So instead of talking about how countries receive climate migrants, I want to talk about how a country in the Global South can prevent that displacement from happening in the first place, and why the IMRF should take that seriously as a migration governance priority. And you can pass the slide, please. The reason why I defend this approach comes down to a simple structural reality. That is that a significant share of the Global South population depends directly on natural resources to survive, like small-scale farmers, riverside communities, indigenous people, quilombolas that are traditional Afro-Brazilian communities here in Brazil, and family fishers, for example. For many of them, that dependence is not only economic, it's also cultural. Their identity, their governance systems, and also their ways of transmitting knowledge across generations, all of this is tied to the territory. So the second reason is these groups also tend to live in areas that combine clear environmental risk with weak infrastructure and no land tenure security. That combination makes forced displacement not a possibility, but a pattern. And climate change is one of the main drivers of the pattern, not only through certain disasters, but through medium and long-term environmental changes. So the point is, it is impossible to prevent much of this displacement if governments design climate policies with migration lens and invest in the resilience of these communities before the breaking point. The most effective response to climate migration, in my opinion, in the Global South is not the reception protocol. It is the policy that makes displacement unnecessary. Like said that, I'll focus on objective 2 of the GCM related to preventing displacement through climate policies, but it won't work without a government framework that prioritizes sustainable funding, inclusive and local decision-making, and reliable data. So that is the frame I want to bring to our recommendation here. And giving that frame, you can pass to the second slide, please. I'll bring here Brazil's example of climate policy governance. Brazil has developed 2 climate adaptation instruments that, in my view, deserve this for orientation, not because they are finished models, but because of what they demonstrate it's possible to do. They were not designed under the label of migration policy, but if they are read through a migration lens, that is exactly what they are. So the first one is the cross-cutting strategy for women and climate. And the second is the adaptation plan for traditional people and communities. I'll briefly present each one as background for our further discussion. Next slide, please. So I start with the women and climate strategy. This strategy was designed to cross-cut every climate policy in Brazil, not as a guideline, but as a mandatory framework governing how policies are drafted, implemented, and monitored. The most important political choice this strategy makes is to refuse the assistencialist view. It does not treat women as victims to be protected after the disasters. It positions them as central agents of resilience and as primarily line of defense against forced displacement before it occurs. So it's not just a guideline. It's like a mandatory framework that cross-cut everything. And why does that matter for migration? Because in traditional communities, it is often the women who organize like the agroecological productions that keep the territory food security intact. They're also who manage water resources, and mostly they are the ones who hold the community together in moments of crisis, like Magdalena just gave us an example of this. However, they bear the heaviest burden of care, they have less access to productive resources, and etc. This strategy is explicit, saying that, and here I'm going to read it, just a paragraph. The presence of women in leadership and decision-making strains the formulation and implementation of climate solutions that are actually aligned with territorial needs. To translate that into our topic, I would say that a woman who leads the management of her territory is itself a displacement prevention policy. And next slide, please. So this strategy, the women and climate strategy, operationalize these through 3 main pillars. And here I want to highlight each one as a potential recommendation to the IMRF. The first is direct financing of adaptation actions led by women in their territories. Because recognizing that climate resources need to reach the hands of those who actually implement adaptation day to day is a huge need to be proposed and discussed. The mechanisms for this here in Brazil are still under construction, but the principle is the right one. And I believe the IMRF should recommend that countries adopt it in their climate adaptation frameworks with auditable transfer mechanisms also for that to happen. The second pillar is the development of gender-sensitive local adaptation plans, because an adaptation plan does not ask women what is at risk. It's an incomplete plan, you know. Women need to participate from the beginning, not be seen only as a vulnerable part to be addressed. This is replicable, and also it is low cost. And I believe it is a standard that IMRF can recommend globally. The third, and this connects directly to a broader gap that Magdalena also mentioned, is the commitment to produce gender disaggregated data in the climate field. And the Brazil strategy, Women and Climate Strategy, acknowledges this, that data does not yet exist in any systematic way here. And this is a significant admission, because as long as climate displaced women are invisible in the statistic, they are not invisible in the policies. And as long as they're invisible in the policies, they're not invisible like in the budget too. So it's like one problem leads to another problem. So this gap in the data is like where everything starts. They need to be produced with gender lens and in a disaggregated way. This is not a technical problem. This is like a political choice. And the IMRF can reverse it. And here is what I want to recommend. Like IMRF could draft a global protocol for registering climate-driven human mobility, disaggregated by gender, by race, and by territory. Because without that, we are making migration governance decisions based on data that erases people that are most affected. Next slide, please. So now I'm gonna pass you the second instrument that is related to the first one, because the first one is cross-cutting, right? So the second instrument is called Adaptation Plan for Traditional Peoples and Communities. Here, I just want to make a quick note on terminology, because in Brazil, when we say traditional communities, it refers not only to indigenous people, but also to all communities that are bound by a shared culture and a way of life connected to nature. So as I was saying, like it comprehend riverside communities, traditional harvests, family farmers, fishers, and others that live by nature. They are all comprehended in this terminology when I say traditional communities, okay? So this plan starts from a premise that is obvious once stated, but rarely built into the policy, which is when a traditional community is forced to leave, it does not just lose its home, it loses its means of subsistence, its cultural identity, its relationship with the land, and the governance system they build across generations. So the problem of displacement for them is bigger than just the economic one. These communities use territory and natural resources as the very condition for their cultural and economic reproduction. The loss of their territory is not just a material loss. This is like the context. You can pass the slide, please. So from everything this adaptation plan addresses, I want to focus on one specific gap, because I believe it is a strategic priority for the Global South that belongs in IMRF discussions, and we not usually hear about it when we talk about migration, which is land tenure security. My recommendation is direct, like land titling should be formally recognized as a climate migration prevention measure. Because when a traditional territory is legally protected and demarcated, the community can invest in staying. It can develop things like agroecological systems, adaptive water management. They can invest in reforestation, knowing they won't lose it. Without a legal security, in situ adaptation is not a real option, because why invest in a territory you might lose tomorrow? So they face this problem, and the practical consequences run across multiple dimensions. Like I'll pass through some of them. For example, on financing with land title, communities can access credit instruments tied to the land. They can access rural insurance, state programs financing sustainable agriculture, payment for ecosystem services, mechanisms that are really like happening here in Brazil, but only for people who hold a title of land. This kind of payment for ecosystem services, they reward the conservation work that these communities do. But without a title, none of those doors of financing is open. Another example is regarding infrastructure. Like governments are generally legally prohibited to build permanent infrastructure in informal settlements. So land regularization is what allows the states to implement permanent adaptation measures there. For example, if they have this title, the government is almost obliged to, for example, construct water and sanitation systems that prevent diseases. They can like invest in drainage, infrastructure, energy access, warning, alarming systems for disasters. Land tenure is the key that unlocks public investment in resilience. And the last example I'm going to give is on security. Like, we could say that legal recognition enables law enforcement to protect the territory against, for example, illegal burning, land invasions, and environmental degradation. It also empowers the community to refuse removal proposals that typically arrive at moments of maximum vulnerability, like when people have the least capacity to resist. So if they have the land title, they have this possibility to make the law enforce that, to protect them and to protect their habitat. My point is, the Brazilian climate plan recognizes that the demarcation and protection of traditional territories are central strategies for meeting Brazil's climate commitments. But what I'm saying is that the IMRF should reach the same conclusion from the migration side. Secure land is the precondition for communities to remain, to adapt, and to rebuild. Without the land title, they're not like able, they don't have the right to stay there and rebuild. So this is like a main issue that impacts their forced displacement. And the gender dimension here is immediate. Like, women in traditional territories are, as Abdul was saying, are disproportionately not the formal title holders of the land they manage. Like, usually, if they have the land title, men hold it. So when the territory is lost, women lose first because they usually don't hold it. Because legally they would never recognize as the owners of the land. So no name on title means no voice in negotiation, means no right to compensation, no standing in the process, and etc. And women are the most affected on that. The Women in Climate Strategy has begun to name this gap. The land tenure systems has not yet responded though. And the space between the climate policies promises and what the land law delivers itself is a driver of displacement. This gap is a driver of displacement, and it belongs in our recommendation to IMRF. It must be discussed for them. Next, please. So, conclusion. I have separated a few recommendations that I believe we can start our discussions from it, which is Brazil does not come to the forum with a finished model. It comes with an honest process, with concrete advances and openly acknowledged gaps. Based on what I have presented, I leave 5 recommendations, which are, first, on framing. I would say that before the specific recommendations, there is one that frames all others. And I believe IMRF should formally recognize women and traditional communities as a priority cross-cutting lens for climate migration governments in the South Global, not as vulnerable groups, but to be assisted after displacement, but as a political subject whose capacity to remain in their territories is the most effective climate migration prevention. This is like the base of everything. Everything else I'm going to recommend today flows from that. None of them work without this first acknowledged. So the second one would be on governance, which is recommend that states institutionalize the participation of women from the traditional communities in climate decision-making bodies, not as consultees, but as deliberative members. And that this participation comes with dedicated resources, not just a seat at the table. Regarding data, I would recommend the creation of a global, as I have said, like creation of a global protocol for registering climate-driven human mobility, disaggregated by gender, race, and territory, separating climate displacement from economic migration in national data systems. Because right now, when displacement happens, it is not recorded as climate-driven. Internal migration registry and categorize it as personal reasons or economic migration. Like we don't have this category in our system. So then the climate cause disappears entirely from the data. States should formally recognize internal climate displacement actually as a distinct legal and statistical category and create an instrument to fix this gap. And next slide, please. Regarding territory adaptation, I would recommend that the demarcation and titling of traditional community lands be formally recognized as a climate migration prevention instrument with a specific attention to ensuring titling in women's name. And my last recommendation would be on financing. I would recommend that global climate funds establish direct transfer mechanisms to women's organizations and traditional communities. The money must be directed direct to women's hands. And these mechanisms must be auditable. And this comes with the recognition that they are already the primary implementers of adaptation in most vulnerable territories. Women are like the primary implementers of adaptation, so they must receive the money directly in an auditable way. So that's it. But for closing, I will summarize saying that like climate migration is not solved after people arrive in their destination. It is solved or prevented in their original territories. With secure land, with women decision-making, with data that makes visible what the system had chosen to ignore. And the IMRF has the opportunity to say that preventing forced displacement is urgent as managing it after it happens. And also that for the Global South, the most effective migration policy is the one that makes displacement unnecessary. And I believe that is what Brazil is trying to build. And that is what we are recommending this forum to bring to New York. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Isabella. That was such a great presentation. It was so interesting to understand how Brazilian government approached this and also a great example of how it should be to other countries and maybe even policies from IMRF as well. So one thing that I would just like to add is the question is not whether people will move, because people are already moving all the time. It's not a future crisis already happening. It's really important to understand if they will be able to move with dignity, safety, and choice, not because they have to, and how we can actually make sure they are safe in this transit, right? We're gonna open the Q&A. So I have two questions in the chat. I'm gonna start with those, and then you can also open your mic for questions to the panelists. So the first question is, I think Magdalena could answer this one. What has been the government's response to the flooding or migration in your respective country, in this case, in Brazil? Magdalena, thank you.
So let's see the question again. I was trying to, so what has been the answer of the government, from the government?
Yeah, the response to the flooding and migration in Brazil specifically.
In terms of emergency, there was a lack of preparation, right? Experience, the organizing. Let me close here this noise. The capacity for organizing. Of course, it's such a huge region that explains the lack of resources to do it, right? But for example, helicopters that could get on time to the roof of people in the middle of the river. So it was very difficult to have these resources, and it took a lot of time for the resources to arrive from the rest of the country here, because I think there was a delay in everyone's recognition of the problem. You know, the first person that, just to give an example, the first person that wrote me to see if I was okay was on May 1st, Labor Day, from Sweden, my supervisor from Sweden, because she has there a group that follows these floods worldwide. So people here, they didn't even realize what was happening in their own state and country, and what was going to keep happening. So the big response nationality came 4 days later, more or less. But also we could observe that when, in terms of financing and money, and there was this dispute between municipality, state, and federal powers. So let's say the municipality would say, no, we are waiting for the federal resource, but then the federal would say no, but they need to send the projects, and the municipality didn't send the projects, so people can't get the money. So there was this dispute because they were from different political parties, and that also created a lot of delay in people getting their emergency money, for example. I think we could see a quicker response from professionals that are already in the front lines. Let's say firefighters, social workers, but still it had to be organized by other institutions like universities. The private sector had to be there as well. With the nation, for example, water, there was a lot of, there was missing water, and then how could water arrive, you know? Then we needed the private sector as well. So what I could say, yeah, there was a lack of preparation from public institutions. They have never, I mean, the only and last one that had taken place here was in 1941. So no one had faced that before. And when the rain was like non-stop, no one saw it coming because of lack of preparation. And it calls my attention that our governor, for example, when he asked people to leave their homes immediately, he didn't say in these words, leave your homes today immediately. He would say, and that's very difficult for vulnerable populations to understand. He would go to TV and say, it will be an event of his unprecedented characteristics. Like, how do people understand that you have to leave home like this? And so there was lack of preparation, of capacity, And then, and there was a response, but delaying the response is delaying the media to cover. The media came here to cover 4 days later. So what happened was that people got together with firefighters and health professionals that are more used to being in the field, and then citizens and NGOs had this. They were already in contact with community leaders. Community leaders in the territories, they were faster, together with NGOs and civil society. Yeah, I think that's it. Let's say we didn't see it coming. These extreme events are going to keep happening, and I'm not sure we are going to be organized for the next ones. I don't see it happening. The money, of course, Brazil is not a rich country, and it's huge, right? But somehow the money is there. We need political willingness to do it, and to do it in the right way, right? So I don't know if I could answer a question. I hope after a year or two I can give a better answer.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your answer. I have another. Yeah, go
Oh,
ahead.
Raquel, I'm seeing like a question here in the chat made by Sarah. She's asking, can I proceed
Yeah,
with
go
this?
ahead.
So because I think this question is really interesting, because she's asking climate mobility discussions often frame women as vulnerable. In your experience, what has actually worked to shift this toward recognizing women and gender diverse people as decision makers? And I have an answer here in Brazil, because what happened for the climate policy recognize this is that for a long time, gender was just a dimension to be taken in account. Like Sarah just said, there was a main climate policy and a gender dimension as a section or an appendix. This is the context, really. But Brazil recently has integrated the Ministry of Women directly into the National Committee on Climate Change, which is the country main climate governance body. And making this connection, women now they hold power to decide and monitor how policies are made. They are in the chair with this power to make the policies, not just be treated as vulnerable parts that must be addressed.
As
You know?
decision makers, right?
Yeah.
We are gonna see women as decision makers as well. And that's what I think Sarah was trying to understand. Like, yeah, right now we cannot address women as only vulnerable, but also as decision makers because we hold that power as well. Go ahead, Magdalena.
Yeah, I just adding to something that Isabella said that is very important, the shifts in public policy and how it's built, right? Tomorrow, I think there will be a panel on media, but I think media and research, we need to start changing the discourse, right? Of putting migrant people as victims and forgetting to show the power, the potential, the force, the resilience, and all the possibilities they have to build new ways, new paths, and that's the same about women specifically, right? To change, to shift this. That's why I'm trying to use a different methodology, a different approach as a researcher, and I think the media has to do the same, right? To change the discourse when it comes to women in general, and then migrant women specifically, and migrants in general, right? And
yeah, like the storytelling has to change.
Sorry?
The storytelling has to change.
Yeah,
like who tells the story and how it is told.
Exactly.
And say please.
No, for that to happen, we need more presence of women everywhere, in the media, in universities, in public, contexts, because then we give voice to women. When we interview women, right? When we research with women. It's like invisible voices.
Exactly. I would like to open to one more question or two more questions if before we move forward. Abdul, do you have a question?
Good question, but I wanted to add to the questions that have been asked earlier regarding some of the policies that have been put in place in our respective countries. Okay, so if you look at Ghana, for instance, where I am coming from, we have a lot of policies that are put in place, and then usually most of them are not really policies, but some of them are actually projects, emergency projects that they normally put in place when issues of this thing happen. So if you look at our we call it NADMO, National Disaster Management Organization. It's a government established organization which is part of the municipal and district assemblies. So they are responsible for responding to emergency situations like flood. So if you are following the news in 2025, Ghana, the our major supplier of electricity, which is the Akosombo Dam, it spilled, and a lot of people were affected within the Akosombo region. So the government initiated this project to support those people who were affected within this region. Actually, a lot of people were displaced, so government has to allocate a lot of resources because they received a lot of funding from support from the World Bank to support this group of people. And then we also have early warning systems that they normally put in place, and these early warning systems cut across districts. So within the municipalities of the country, warnings have been put across, especially flood-prone areas, to stop people from building in those areas. You know, for us, most of the areas that we are residing, it is not most people are residing in place that they know that even if there is a heavy downpour, they are going to be affected.
Go ahead, Magdalena.
What I think what Abdul says is very important to our reality as well, because after disasters, we always say we need to remove or people need to leave these areas, right? And then we are going to do it. But then when you go back there 5 years later, the families are there because there are many aspects to be considered when you say people have to leave these vulnerable, more affected or risky areas. It's very difficult to make people leave. Even sometimes when you suggest apartment buildings or they build somewhere else, it's going to be far from them to get to work. It's going to be they have other relationship to the land, and then what he says, it's important that these people are not in risky areas anymore. It's something very difficult to address.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you so much, Abdul. Thank you, Magdalena, Isabella, for your considerations. We have to close the session. I would like to thank you, everyone. Thank you, our speakers, and everyone who is here and contributed to this discussion and to the board today. Please keep adding recommendations to the board. We share the link, so you're welcome to share after this session. And please keep in touch with us on social media, follow our work. To learn more about our work, just search for us on social media or search for our website. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here. It's really meaningful to build this dialogue with you about this topic. Have a great day.